What if I told you that after qualifying for the Chinese Grand Prix, several teams in the paddock left the garage asking themselves exactly the same question? What the hell is Mercedes doing with the W17 in qualifying? Subscribe to continue uploading more of this type of content now, if we continue. Because George Russell's return wasn't just quick, it was strange. Strange for the engineers at Ferrari, for those at McLaren, and also for Red Bull. The splits didn't add up, the speed on the straight was too consistent, and the car seemed to have power until the last meter of the straight. But the most shocking thing came later. Lewis Hamilton, one of the drivers who best understands how a Formula One car works at the limit, released a revelation that left many within the paddock completely surprised. According to him, Mercedes has found a very specific qualifying advantage with the W17, an advantage that doesn't just have to do with aerodynamics, but with something much deeper in the way the car uses its energy. The Friday of the Chinese Grand Prix began with a very clear feeling within the paddock. No one was really clear about what the true order of forces was in this second race of the season. The sprint format greatly complicates the team's work because there's only one practice session to understand the car before facing qualifying directly. That means every adjustment is a gamble and every mistake can cost important positions on the grid. With so little time to prepare the cars, most teams decided to start with very aggressive running-in programs. The drivers took to the track from the first moment, trying to gather as much information as possible about the behavior of the car, the grip of the asphalt, and the temperature of the tires. The Shanghai circuit had also recently been resurfaced, which made it even more difficult to predict how the grip would evolve during the session. While many teams were still trying to understand their cars, Mercedes began to attract attention. George Russell quickly appeared at the top of the timesheets during practice, setting very competitive laps even when the track was not yet in its best condition. That detail did not go unnoticed by the engineers of the rival teams, because normally the fastest times come when the circuit is already completely rubberized. But the real impact came when the qualifying simulations began. The midterms began to show something curious. The Mercedes was not only fast in curves or in technical areas. The W17 seemed especially strong on the long straights and during acceleration, something that tends to make important differences in Shanghai due to the circuit's enormous backstraight. Engineers began to look at the data more closely. In many cars, when drivers attack a qualifying lap, the hybrid system releases a large amount of energy at the beginning of the straight. However, towards the end of that stretch, the car begins to lose thrust because the battery has already used up much of its available energy. Something different seemed to happen with the Mercedes. The W17 maintained much more constant acceleration until the end of the straight, which meant that the car continued pushing when other cars were already losing power. That small detail may seem insignificant from the outside, but on a circuit like Shanghai, it can represent several tenths in a single lap. And it was right after the session when Lewis Hamilton left one of the most revealing statements of the weekend. The seven-time world champion explained that the advantage that the Mercedes is showing in qualifying does not come solely from aerodynamics or the balance of the chassis. According to him, the key is in the way in which Mercedes is using the engine and the hybrid system when the lap arrives. Hamilton noted that the team has managed to optimize energy management in a very efficient way. This means recovering energy during braking more effectively, and above all, deploying that energy exactly at the moments where the car can gain more time during the lap. This type of optimization is extremely difficult to achieve because the hybrid system in Formula One has very strict limits on how much energy can be used in each lap. Finding a way to distribute that energy perfectly throughout the circuit can make the difference between a good lap and a lap that is practically impossible to match. And what was seen in Shanghai made something very interesting clear. George Russell seemed to be exploiting that advantage better than anyone. His lap was a combination of aggressive braking, constant cornering speed, and brutal acceleration on the straights. Everything fit perfectly with the behavior of the W17 when the team unleashes its full potential for qualifying. This caused several engineers to begin reviewing the data with much more interest. Because if Mercedes really has found a more efficient way to use its energy during a flying lap, then the rest of the paddock could be facing a much bigger problem than it seemed at the start of the season. And the big question that began to be heard in the garages of Ferrari, McLaren, and Red Bull was just one. After qualifying in Shanghai, the conversation inside the paddock began to become increasingly intense. Because it is one thing for a car to be fast in a specific session, but it is quite another when the data begins to show a clear technical pattern. And that's exactly what happened when engineers began checking the sectors of George Russell's lap. The Chinese circuit has something very particular that makes it a perfect detector of technical advantages. It is not just a layout of fast curves or technical areas. Shanghai mixes very strong braking, long support curves, and above all, an endless straight where the efficiency of a hybrid system is completely exposed. And that was where the Mercedes began to raise suspicions. When the teams analyzed the splits, they noticed something very interesting. Russell was not only gaining time at one point on the circuit. His advantage appeared in different areas of the lap, especially in long accelerations. The W17 seemed to maintain a much more constant power delivery than other cars, avoiding a problem that many teams know all too well. That problem is called clipping. In today's Formula One, hybrid systems have a limited amount of electrical energy they can use on each lap. When the driver accelerates hard for a long time, that energy is used up and the car loses some of its thrust before reaching the end of the straight. It is something that happens in almost all the cars in the paddock. But as Lewis Hamilton explained, Mercedes seems to have found a way to reduce that effect to a minimum. The W17 manages to manage its energy much more efficiently, allowing the car to maintain power for longer on long straights. This means that while some cars begin to lose speed in the last few meters of the straight, the Mercedes continues to push hard until the breaking point. In a classification, that difference can be brutal, but the hybrid system is not the only factor that began to attract attention. Another detail that was commented a lot within the paddock was the behavior of the W17 chassis when the drivers attacked the limits of the car. The Mercedes appears to be extremely stable under hard braking. That stability allows drivers like Russell to brake later and maintain control of the car even when pushing hard. When a car combines late braking with very strong acceleration at corner exit, the result can be an extremely difficult lap to match. And that's exactly what happened in Shanghai. Russell's return was a near-perfect mix of aggression and precision. It attacked the brakes without losing stability, maintained good speed in long corners, and then unleashed all the power of the hybrid system on the straights. But what really began to worry rivals was something else. Because when the teams tried to understand where exactly that advantage came from, they didn't find a clear answer. In Formula One, when one team discovers an aerodynamic advantage, it is usually a matter of time before the others copy it. Visual solutions can be analyzed in photos, compared in wind tunnels, and replicated fairly quickly. But when the advantage is in the energy management of the hybrid engine, the story is very different. That kind of performance depends on an extremely complex combination of software, engine calibration, energy recovery, and deployment strategies during the lap. Copying that type of optimization is not something that can be done in a week. And that's why, after qualifying for the Chinese Grand Prix, many engineers began to ask themselves the same question in their garages. Has Mercedes found a way to exploit its hybrid system that others still don't understand? Because if the answer is yes. So what we saw in Shanghai could be just the first sign of an advantage that could be repeated throughout the season. After everything that began to be discussed after qualifying in China, the real impact was not only in the return of George Russell, but in what it could mean for the rest of the season. Because if the Mercedes W17's advantage in qualifying is real and repeatable, the competitive landscape of Formula One could change much faster than many expected. In modern Formula One, getting ahead on the grid is more important than ever. Today's cars generate so much dirty air that overtaking has become increasingly difficult. That means that a position gained on Saturday often becomes a position defended on Sunday. That is why the possibility of Mercedes having a particularly strong car in qualifying worries rivals so much. Lewis Hamilton was very clear when speaking about this point. The Briton acknowledged that the W17 seems to have a very strong performance when the team unleashes the car's full potential for a single lap. This ability to squeeze the most out of the engine and the hybrid system during qualifying can become a very powerful weapon if Mercedes manages to repeat that performance on different circuits on the calendar. But what makes this situation even more interesting is the role of George Russell. The British driver has shown on several occasions that he is especially strong when it comes to attacking a fast lap. His aggressive braking style and his ability to push the car to the limit fit perfectly with a car that responds well when all its power is unleashed in qualifying. And in Shanghai, that combination was seen with complete clarity. Russell was able to build a very complete lap, braking late, maintaining speed in the long corners, and exploiting all the acceleration of the W17 on the straights. That mix turned his lap into one of the references of the weekend and left many teams reviewing data to understand where exactly that difference came from. But there is a detail that worries even more within the paddock. When a team finds performance in aerodynamics, rivals can usually copy that idea relatively quickly. Cameras, photos, and visual analysis allow you to identify technical solutions and start working on something similar. However, when the advantage is in the energy management of the hybrid engine, the process to replicate it is much more complicated. That kind of performance depends on internal engine calibrations, energy recovery strategies, electrical deployment maps, and extremely complex settings that can't be copied just by looking at the car from the outside. And that means that if Mercedes really has found a more efficient way to use its energy in qualifying, it could maintain that advantage for quite some time while others try to figure out how it works. Therefore, after qualifying for the Chinese Grand Prix, the feeling within the paddock was quite clear. Maybe Mercedes still doesn't have the perfect car to dominate every race. But if what Hamilton said is true, the W17 could have something that is worth gold in Formula One. After everything that happened in qualifying for the Chinese Grand Prix, one thing was clear within the paddock: the Mercedes W17 could have something special when it comes time to attack a fast lap. It wasn't just an isolated good performance or a simple coincidence. The data, the partials, and Lewis Hamilton's own words point to a very specific advantage that is related to the way in which Mercedes manages the energy of its hybrid system during qualifying. Subscribe to continue uploading more of that content. Now you really think about all this.